A widow with 2 daughters saw a millionaire throw a small coffin in the dump. She approached and decided to lift the lid, and as soon as she opened it, her whole body froze. The fine rain of the early morning transformed the municipal dump into a sea of mud and desolation, where Sarah Johnson walked with firm steps between mountains of waste that rose like monuments to human misery. At 36, her brown face still maintained traces of a beauty that time and adversity had not completely erased, although the wrinkles around her brown eyes revealed sleepless nights and constant worries. Her calloused hands held a half-full plastic bag of recyclable materials, the fruit of 4 hours of hard work under the persistent drizzle that wet her black hair tied in a disheveled ponytail. "I need to find more cans today. Victoria will need the new medicine the doctor mentioned, and I still have to buy milk for the girls' breakfast." The cold early morning wind cut through her faded cotton blouse and patched-up sweatshirt jacket that had belonged to her late husband, who died 4 years ago in a work accident that left the family without their main source of income. Sarah adjusted the collar of the jacket against her neck, feeling the familiar smell of dampness and iron that permeated the fabric, while her experienced eyes scanned the terrain in search of something valuable among the garbage. She had learned to identify the best collection spots, knew exactly which trucks dumped more usable materials, and knew every corner of that place that had become her second home since life forced her to seek sustenance where others only saw waste. He always said that God never abandons those who work honestly, even in the most difficult places in the world. Victoria, her youngest daughter of only 9 years, was born with a congenital heart condition that required constant medical care and expensive medications that consumed a large part of the already scarce family income. The girl, small for her age and with skin always pale due to poor circulation, had lost weight in recent weeks and experienced increasingly frequent bouts of fatigue that kept Sarah in a state of permanent alert. Samantha, the 15-year-old eldest daughter, tried to help by taking care of her sister while studying in the evening, but Sarah saw in the teenager's eyes the same concern that consumed her daily. "My Victoria is so fragile, but has a heart bigger than the whole world. She always asks me if I'm okay when I get home from work, even though she's the one who needs care the most." Sarah's routine at the dump always began at 2 in the morning, when collection trucks dumped the previous day's material, and she could find the best items before other waste pickers arrived. She had developed an efficient technique over the years, quickly separating aluminum, cardboard, plastic, and other recyclable materials that she could sell to middlemen who bought the material at low prices, but which guaranteed a minimum income to support her family. Her punctured rubber boots made noise in the mud as she moved among the debris, always alert to the sounds around her, as the dump at night could be dangerous for a woman alone. "I can't be afraid, my daughters depend on me, and if I don't work today, tomorrow we won't even have the basics to survive." The sound of a powerful engine broke the silence of the early morning, making Sarah raise her head and look toward the main gate of the dump, where vehicles rarely appeared at that hour. A black luxury car with dark windows parked near the entrance, and from it, she could see the silhouette of an elegant man exiting the vehicle with hurried and nervous movements. The man wore a dark suit that contrasted drastically with the sordid environment of the dump, and Sarah noticed that he was carrying something in his hands while looking around, as if afraid of being observed. "How strange. I've never seen anyone dressed like that around here, especially at this hour of the morning. It must be something very important for someone like that to come to a place like this." Sarah instinctively crouched behind a pile of garbage bags, keeping herself hidden, but with a clear view of the mysterious man who was walking quickly between the piles of debris. The fine rain made it difficult to see, and the darkness of early morning made it impossible to clearly distinguish the features of the unexpected visitor, but she could see that he was carrying a small rectangular object that shone faintly under the weak light of distant posts. The man constantly stopped to look over his shoulder, obviously concerned about not being seen, and Sarah noticed that his hands trembled slightly as he searched for a specific place to discard whatever he was bringing. "This man is very afraid of something. Normal people don't come here in the middle of the night, much less dressed like that. He must be running from something or hiding something very dangerous." The stranger finally stopped in an isolated area of the dump, near a pile of construction debris, and Sarah saw him kneel down and begin to dig a shallow hole in the soft earth. At that moment, the sharp sound of a cell phone ringing broke the silence, and the man quickly answered with a tense voice that Sarah could partially hear due to the proximity. She moved a few meters closer, keeping herself hidden, and managed to catch fragments of the telephone conversation that seemed to confirm her suspicions about the suspicious nature of that nocturnal visit. "It's done. Edward will never find it here," said the man with a harsh and authoritative voice that demonstrated both relief and nervousness. The phone conversation continued for a few minutes, but Sarah couldn't hear more details due to the noise of the rain and the distance. However, she noticed that the man was clearly reporting the completion of some important mission to his interlocutor. After hanging up the phone, the mysterious visitor finished burying the object he had brought, covered the spot with debris and dry leaves to disguise any evidence of excavation, and quickly headed back to the car. Sarah remained motionless in her hiding place until she heard the sound of the engine moving away, and was sure that she was once again alone in the silent dump. Edward. That name is etched in my mind. It seems that someone named Edward is being deceived by this man, and whatever he hid here must be something very valuable or very dangerous. After waiting about 15 minutes to be absolutely certain that the man had departed and would not return, Sarah left her hiding place and walked cautiously toward the location where she had witnessed the nocturnal excavation. Her heart was beating rapidly as she approached the pile of debris, and her hands trembled slightly due to a mixture of curiosity, fear, and intuition that she was about to discover something that would change her life forever. Carefully, she began to remove the debris and leaves that covered the hole, using an iron rod found at the dump itself to avoid touching the buried object directly. I know I shouldn't be messing with this, but something tells me I need to see what that man hid here. Maybe it's something that could help this Edward he mentioned. After a few minutes of careful excavation, Sarah felt the iron rod touch something solid and different from the wet earth, and when she removed a bit more dirt, she could clearly see a small, ornate casket made of dark wood with golden details that shone even under the weak light of dawn. The object was surprisingly beautiful and elaborate, completely out of place in that desolate environment, and Sarah immediately realized that it was something very valuable and important. Her hands trembled when she touched the smooth surface of the casket, feeling the quality of the material and the delicacy of the decorative carvings that suggested considerable value. My God, this looks very expensive. Why would someone bury such a beautiful thing in a place like this? There must be something very important inside it. Sarah completely removed the casket from the earth, cleaned the surface with the sleeve of her jacket, and looked for a better lit location near one of the lampposts to better examine her extraordinary discovery. The casket was smaller than a shoebox, but its refined construction and artistic details suggested that it had been made by a skilled craftsman and had cost a significant amount of money. She rotated the object in her hands, looking for locks or opening mechanisms, and discovered that the lid was merely fitted, with no padlocks or latches preventing it from being opened. Maybe I shouldn't open this. It could be something dangerous or belong to dangerous people. But at the same time, if it's something valuable that was stolen, I should try to return it to its rightful owner. Curiosity finally overcame caution, and Sarah decided to open the casket to discover what had caused so much nervousness in the mysterious man who had buried it in the middle of the night. Carefully, she lifted the ornate lid and felt her entire body freeze when she saw the content that was before her eyes. Stacks and stacks of money carefully organized, official documents with seals and signatures, and small electronic devices that appeared to be flash drives or memory cards. The amount of money was impressive, more than Sarah had seen in her entire life, and she quickly calculated that there must be at least 200,000 or 300,000 monetary units in those perfectly aligned stacks. Good Lord, this is more money than I could earn in 10 years of work, and these documents seem to be very important. Certainly someone very powerful is involved in all this. Sarah picked up some of the documents with trembling hands and tried to read the content under the dim light of the street lamp, managing to distinguish the name Thompson and Associates on several official letterheads and the signature of someone named Edward Thompson on various contracts and commercial agreements. The documents seemed to refer to high-value financial transactions, property investments, and business deals involving millions in various ventures. Sarah realized she was holding evidence of important business activities, possibly related to the Edward mentioned in the phone conversation she had overheard minutes before. Edward Thompson, this must be the man that Guy mentioned on the phone. And from what I'm seeing in these documents, he must be very rich and powerful, perhaps the owner of a large company. While examining the contents of the chest, Sarah was overcome by a complex mixture of emotions that included fascination with the discovery, fear of possible consequences, and a growing awareness that she was facing a decision that could completely change the course of her life and the lives of her daughters. The money present there would be enough to pay for Victoria's heart surgery, ensure a better future for Samantha, buy a decent house, and provide the family with a life free from the financial worries that tormented them daily. On the other hand, her conscience and the moral values that my husband had taught her screamed that the money did not belong to her, and that the right thing to do would be to find its rightful owner. He used to say that easy money never brings true happiness, that honesty is the only path to a life at peace with God and with one's own conscience. Sarah carefully closed the chest and held it against her chest as she slowly walked back through the dump, her mind working furiously to process the magnitude of the situation she found herself in. She thought of Victoria, whose condition had visibly worsened in recent weeks, with episodes of extreme fatigue and breathing difficulties that left her increasingly worried and desperate. The girl urgently needed heart surgery that cost exactly $250,000, an impossible amount for a family that lived from collecting recyclable materials and depended on government social assistance programs. With this money, I could save my daughter immediately, give her the chance to have a normal and healthy life. But would God forgive me for keeping something that isn't mine? The weight of the chest in her hands seemed to increase with each step, not due to the physical weight of the object, but because of the emotional and moral burden it represented for a woman who had spent her entire life struggling to keep her family together through honest work and personal dignity. Sarah remembered the words of her mother, who died 10 years ago, who always said that a person's true wealth was not in the money they possessed, but in the peace of mind that came from knowing they had always done the right thing, even when it meant personal sacrifice. She also thought of him, who had worked hard all his life in dangerous jobs to support the family, always refusing to accept money of dubious origin or to participate in schemes that could compromise his integrity. My husband died working honestly, and I promised him that I would raise our daughters following the same principles he taught me. I cannot break that promise now. As she walked toward the exit of the dump, Sarah was surprised by a crisis of conscience that made her stop in the middle of the way and reconsider the entire situation from a different perspective. She thought about the possibility that the money in the chest might have been obtained through criminal activities or corruption, and that by keeping it, she would be becoming an accomplice to crimes she knew nothing about. On the other hand, she considered the hypothesis that the Edward mentioned in the phone conversation might be the victim of a theft or scam, and that returning the chest could be an act of justice that would help an innocent person recover what was taken from them. If this Edward is really the victim of some crime, then returning this chest would be the right thing to do, and perhaps God will find a way to help Victoria through other means. Sarah's final decision was influenced by a deep faith that had sustained her family through all the difficult moments since she became a widow, a belief that God always rewards those who do the right thing, even when it requires personal sacrifice. She decided she would look for this Edward Thompson the next day and return the chest with all its contents, trusting that her honesty would be rewarded in some way she could not yet understand. Sarah firmly believed that if she did the right thing, God would find a way to help Victoria, perhaps through a medical scholarship, the generosity of kind people, or some miracle that her faith would make possible. I will return this box to its rightful owner, and I will trust that God will take care of my Victoria, because he never abandons those who act with honesty and true faith. Sarah carefully hid the box inside her jacket and quickened her pace toward her simple home, located in a humble neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, anxious to get home and check on how her daughters had spent the night. The journey back always left her worried, especially when Victoria wasn't feeling well, as the girl sometimes hid her symptoms to avoid worrying her mother, who already carried so many responsibilities on her shoulders. Samantha was a mature and responsible teenager, But Sarah knew it wasn't fair to place so much weight on a young girl of only 15 who should be focused on her studies and her own youth. "My girls are so brave and strong. They deserve a better life than this one I can offer. But I will continue fighting until I find a way to give them the future they deserve." When Sarah finally arrived at her small and modest home, with peeling walls and a roof that let the rain through in some places, she found the front door unlocked and a light on in the living room, indicating that something was happening. Her heart immediately raced, because Samantha always locked the door and turned off the lights when she went to sleep, and the only reason for the house to be illuminated at that hour would be if there was some problem with Victoria. Sarah quickly entered the house, hid the box under a pile of clothes in her room, and rushed to check what was happening in the living room. "Please God, don't let it be anything serious with my Victoria. She has already suffered so much with this heart disease. I don't know if I could bear to see her get even worse." The scene Sarah found in the living room confirmed her worst fears. Victoria was unconscious on the couch, with skin even paler than normal and slightly bluish lips, while Samantha was kneeling beside her sister, holding her small hand and crying silently. The teenager looked at her mother with eyes full of tears and despair, clearly frightened by the younger sister's condition and not knowing what to do to help her. Sarah immediately rushed to the couch, knelt beside Victoria and placed her hand on the girl's forehead, feeling that she was cold and sweating, signs that confirmed that her heart condition had deteriorated significantly. "Mom, she fainted an hour ago and can't really wake up. She tried to tell me something about worrying too much about you, but then she became very weak and fainted again." Samantha explained between sobs that Victoria had spent the entire night awake, walking around the house and looking out the window as if waiting for her mother to return, and that she had commented several times about her concern for Sarah working alone at the dump during the night. The girl had forced herself to stay awake despite extreme fatigue, and when she finally tried to lie down, she was overcome by an anxiety attack that further accelerated her heart, already weakened by the congenital condition. The emotional stress of constantly worrying about her mother's safety, combined with her delicate medical condition, had created a critical situation that required immediate medical attention. She kept repeating that she was afraid something bad would happen to you at the dump, that she had nightmares about bad people hurting you, and this kept her very agitated all night. Sarah felt a wave of guilt and despair upon realizing that her own struggle to support the family was causing additional suffering to her sick daughter, creating a vicious cycle where her attempt to care for Victoria was, ironically, worsening the girl's condition. She hugged Samantha, who was trembling with fear and exhaustion, and tried to think quickly about what to do to help Victoria without having money to pay for private medical care or fast transportation to the public hospital. In that moment of total desperation, Sarah remembered the box hidden in her room and the decision she had made to return it, questioning whether she was making the right choice when her daughter was literally dying in her arms. "Maybe I'm being too proud. Maybe God put this money in my path exactly to save Victoria, but it could also be a temptation to test my faith and honesty." The morning sun had already risen when Sarah finally managed to stabilize Victoria, enough to leave her under Samantha's care, after an anguishing night in which the girl alternated between moments of consciousness and worrying, fainting spells that kept the entire family in a state of constant panic. Sarah had spent hours holding her daughter's cold hand, praying the rosary her mother had given her decades ago, and silently promising that she would find a way to get the money for the surgery, even if it meant sticking to her risky decision to return the coffin found in the dump. She dressed in her best clothes, a faded blue blouse that had been a wedding gift from a neighbor, and a black skirt she kept for special occasions like Seventh-day Masses, trying to look minimally presentable to visit the office of someone who was clearly an important and powerful person in the city. Before leaving, Sarah knelt beside the bed where Victoria restlessly dozed and whispered with a choked voice, "Victoria, my dear daughter, Mommy is going to solve this today. I'm going to find this Mr. Edward, and I trust that God will show us the right path to heal your little heart that suffers so much. You just need to hold on until I come back with a solution for our problems." The headquarters of Thompson and Associates was located in the financial center of the city, an imposing 20-story building with a mirrored glass facade that reflected the blue morning sky and intimidated any simple person who approached its main entrance, with uniformed doormen and security cameras everywhere. Sarah firmly held the ornate coffin against her chest while observing the incessant movement of well-dressed executives entering and leaving the building, all carrying Italian leather briefcases and talking on cell phones with the natural confidence of people accustomed to power, money, and decisions that affect hundreds of lives. She felt completely out of place in that sophisticated and cold environment, like a wildflower trying to grow in a garden of cultivated roses. But her unwavering determination to do the right thing prevented her from going home without fulfilling her sacred mission of returning the found object to its rightful owner. Sarah paused for a moment on the sidewalk, observing the intimidating building, and murmured a silent prayer. Lord Jesus, give me strength to face this world that is not mine. Help me find the right words to explain the truth to this man who must be accustomed to people very different from me. May my simplicity not be seen as ignorance, but as sincerity. The lobby of the building was even more intimidating than its exterior facade, with polished marble floors that reflected the lights of imported crystal chandeliers, expensive ornamental plants in Chinese porcelain vases, and luxurious decoration that clearly demonstrated the stratospheric economic level of the companies that operated there, and the clients who frequented that exclusive environment. Sarah timidly approached the reception, where a young woman of approximately 25 years, elegantly dressed in a grey suit that probably cost more than a teacher's monthly salary, looked her up and down with a mixture of poorly disguised curiosity and aristocratic disdain, clearly surprised and bothered by the presence of such a simple and visibly poor woman in that sanctuary of capitalism. The receptionist, with perfectly manicured nails and impeccable makeup, asked with an artificially sweet but inwardly cold voice what the specific reason for her visit was, and Sarah explained with a trembling but determined voice that she urgently needed to speak with Mr. Edward Thompson about an extremely important personal matter that could not be discussed or resolved with anyone else in the world. Sarah felt the weight of the receptionist's judgmental gaze and thought bitterly, "This young woman looks at me as if I were a strange animal that entered the wrong place. But I need to remember that I'm not here for myself. I'm here for Victoria and for the truth. Lord, don't let this woman's arrogance discourage me from doing what is right." After several minutes of tense negotiation and growing insistence, during which Sarah had to repeat at least 5 times that her matter was extremely urgent, confidential, and that only Edward Thompson himself could resolve the situation, the receptionist finally agreed to call the businessman's private office on the 20th floor. Sarah could hear only fragments of the professional telephone conversation, but noticed from the gradual change in the receptionist's facial expression that Edward had agreed to receive her, probably more out of natural curiosity than any realistic expectation that a woman like Sarah might have something genuinely important or valuable to offer him. The receptionist hung up the phone and, with a forced courtesy that couldn't completely hide her class prejudice, indicated the golden elevators and informed that Sarah should go directly to the 20th floor, where Edward Thompson's personal secretary would be waiting to escort her to the main office. While waiting for the elevator, Sarah murmured quietly, more to herself than to any human ear, "Thank God Almighty he agreed to see me. Now I need to trust that he will put the right words in my mouth to explain this whole complicated situation. May I convey the truth without seeming crazy or dishonest?" The elevator rose silently through the floors, and Sarah felt her stomach turn, not just from the upward movement, but mainly from the growing anxiety of being about to meet a powerful man who could easily have her arrested if he distrusted her intentions or believed she was attempting some kind of elaborate scam. When the doors opened on the 20th floor, Sarah was greeted by a middle-aged secretary, elegantly dressed but with a genuinely warm smile that pleasantly contrasted with the coldness of the ground floor receptionist. The secretary led Sarah through a hallway decorated with expensive paintings and Persian rugs until they reached the solid double wooden doors that gave access to Edward Thompson's main office. Before knocking on the door, she turned to Sarah and said with motherly kindness, "Don't worry, dear Mr. Edward is going through very difficult times lately, but he is a fair man and will listen to you attentively if you really have something important to tell him. Just stay calm and tell the truth, because he has a sixth sense for detecting lies after so many years dealing with people of all kinds." Edward Thompson's office occupied a spacious room with a panoramic view of the entire city, decorated with furniture made of fine wood imported from Northern Europe, original paintings by famous artists that Sarah couldn't identify but which obviously were worth fortunes, and shelves filled with thick books on commercial law, international economics and business administration that clearly demonstrated the privileged education and high social status of its occupant. Edward was a man of approximately 50 years, perfectly groomed grey hair by an expensive hairdresser, wearing an impeccably cut Italian suit that probably cost more than Sarah earned in 2 entire years of hard work at the municipal dump. His greyish-blue eyes showed sharp intelligence and life experience, but also a deep tension and constant worry that became even more evident when he saw Sarah enter his private sanctuary carrying the ornate box that he immediately recognized with a visible shock that made his face drastically pale. Edward rose abruptly from his Italian leather executive chair, knocking over some papers that were on the desk, and fixed Sarah with a penetrating and frightening look that mixed genuine surprise, instinctive distrust, and a touch of real fear. "How the hell did you get that? Where exactly did you come from? Who sent you here? Answer now, because I have no patience for games or lies." She repeated exactly the words she had heard in the telephone conversation, word for word, observing how Edward's face grew increasingly pale and his hands began to tremble slightly as she spoke, especially when she mentioned the specific and revealing phrase that the man had said on the phone about Edward never finding that in the dump. Edward began to walk nervously around the luxurious office, his footsteps muffled by the extremely expensive Persian carpet, interrupting Sarah several times with pointed and specific questions about exact times, detailed physical descriptions, and precise location details, clearly trying with growing desperation to determine if she was telling the absolute truth or if she was part of some elaborate and sophisticated scheme to confuse him even further. Sarah kept her voice steady and looked directly into Edward's eyes as she responded, "Mr. Edward, you need to understand something very important about me. I don't want absolutely any of this for myself or my family. I just want to return what isn't mine because my mother and my late husband taught me that God always cares for and rewards those who act with complete honesty, even when it seems impossible or when everyone around thinks we're crazy for doing what's right." Edward abruptly stopped walking and stared at Sarah with a complex facial expression that mixed deep incredulity, growing interest, and genuine mental confusion, clearly struggling internally to process the seemingly impossible possibility that a completely unknown woman, visibly poor and without any connection to his world, was voluntarily returning something of incalculable value without expecting absolutely anything in return, materially or financially. He slowly approached the executive desk, where Sarah had carefully placed the ornate box, and began to ask a series of increasingly specific, technical, and psychologically penetrating questions, methodically questioning how she had discovered his full name, why she had chosen to come directly to his company instead of going to the police, what her true hidden motivation was for this unexpected visit, and if she really expected him to believe such an extraordinary and improbable story. Edward crossed his arms and assumed a defensive posture typical of someone accustomed to negotiating with dangerous people. "Listen here, ma'am. I didn't get where I am by being naive or trusting any beautiful story that appears before me. In 3 decades of business, I've seen all types of imaginable scams, from the simplest to the most sophisticated. So tell me now, without beating around the bush, how much do you want to return this to me? What's your price? Because everyone has a price, and I prefer to negotiate openly rather than waste time with theater." Sarah took a deep breath and decided to tell the whole truth about her desperate situation, even knowing that this could make Edward suspect her intentions even more. "Mr. Edward, I'm going to be completely honest with you, even if it makes you distrust me even more. I've been working collecting trash for 4 years to support my 2 daughters, one of whom is seriously ill with a heart condition and urgently needs surgery that costs a fortune. I could never save up enough even if I worked 24 hours a day for 10 straight years. This box has enough money to save my daughter and completely change our lives. But even so, I'm here returning everything because my mother taught me since I was little that ill-gotten money never brings true happiness. It only brings misfortune and suffering to the entire family. The specific mention of the sick daughter and heart surgery seemed to touch something deep in Edward's soul, who slightly softened his defensive and aggressive posture, but still maintained an attitude of extreme caution and distrust as he continued to interrogate Sarah about every minute aspect of her personal and family history. He began to circle around her like an experienced criminal lawyer, questioning a suspicious witness in a life-or-death trial, asking about intimate details of her family, her degrading work, her desperate financial situation, and her deep religious motivations, clearly looking for narrative inconsistencies, logical contradictions, or revealing signs that she might be lying, manipulating the situation, or playing some rehearsed role. Sarah answered each invasive question with a cutting honesty that went straight to the bone, telling without shame about her husband's tragic death in a work accident, the financial difficulties that forced her to seek sustenance in garbage, Victoria's progressive heart condition that worsened each day, and her unwavering faith that God would help, even when it requires personal sacrifice almost impossible to bear. Edward stopped in front of her and stared at her intensely. "You're telling me you have a dying daughter, that you desperately need this money, and yet you're here returning everything to me out of pure Christian goodness. I'm sorry, but that sounds too good to be true. Either you're a saint, or you're the best actress I've ever met, or you're setting up the most elaborate scam of my life." Edward finally stopped walking in circles and sat heavily in his executive chair, running his hands through his perfectly combed grey hair while mentally processing the extraordinary and seemingly impossible story he had just heard, clearly divided between his bitter life experience in business that told him to distrust absolutely everything and everyone, and a growing and disturbing intuition that Sarah might be telling the purest and simplest truth he had heard in decades. Sarah listened attentively, with genuine compassion on her face, as Edward described in painful detail the devastating anguish of seeing the work of a lifetime being methodically destroyed by someone he had blindly trusted, someone close enough to know all the intimate secrets, all the hidden vulnerabilities, and all the weak points of the company he had built with sweat and tears. Edward leaned forward and fixed Sarah with tired eyes. "I have been looking for these damn pieces of evidence like a desperate madman, hired the best private investigators in the country, independent international auditors, even FBI digital security specialists, spent a fortune on tracking technology. But I've never been able to find a single piece of evidence, not even microscopic evidence against the son of a bitch who is stealing from me and destroying my 40-year reputation of honest work." Edward stood up again, walked to the panoramic window and stood watching the city below as he continued his bitter account, telling how the situation had affected not only his business, but also his mental health, his family relationships, and his ability to trust anyone close to him. He explained that he had begun to suspect everyone around him, from his oldest partners to his own personal secretary, and that this growing paranoia was destroying relationships that had taken decades to build. Sarah felt genuine compassion for this powerful man who, despite all his wealth and influence, was suffering a betrayal that was consuming him from within like an emotional cancer. Edward turned to her with tearful eyes. "You have no idea what it's like to discover that someone you completely trusted is stabbing you in the back every day, stealing not just your money, but also your peace of mind, your ability to sleep at night, your faith in human nature. I have been waking up every early morning for the past few months, wondering who the traitor is, how he manages to deceive me so easily, and how much longer I will be able to endure this psychological torture before going completely insane or having a heart attack." Finally, Edward made a decision that would change everything. He decided to open the coffin and examine its mysterious contents, and Sarah observed with growing attention as his facial expression changed dramatically as he leafed through the compromising documents, analyzed the suspicious flash drives, and slowly understood the explosive magnitude of the evidence he had before his eyes like a gift from the gods. The documents contained forged contracts with falsified signatures, unauthorized bank transfers to offshore accounts, detailed records of all fraudulent transactions that had been methodically carried out over the past 8 months, and sufficient digital evidence not only to identify the culprit with absolute certainty, but also to recover all the stolen money through rigorous legal proceedings and devastating criminal actions. Edward remained silent for several minutes that seemed eternal, clearly moved to tears by the discovery that he finally had in his hands the evidence he had desperately sought with the fury of a man possessed. And when he raised his blue eyes to face Sarah, there were genuine tears of gratitude and absolute disbelief rolling down his mature face. Edward tried to speak, but his voice was choked with emotion. "My almighty God, Miss Sarah, you have no idea what you have just done for me and my family. This evidence is exactly what I needed to prove my innocence, identify the real culprit, and save my company from total bankruptcy. You have literally saved my life, my reputation, and the future of my children. How can I ever repay such unbelievable generosity?" At the exact moment when Edward was beginning to express his profound gratitude and finally accepting that Sarah really was a genuinely honest person trying to do the right thing without expecting anything in return, Sarah's cell phone rang with the characteristic and unmistakable urgency of a very serious family emergency. She quickly answered with her heart already racing with instinctive fear, and heard the completely desperate voice of Samantha on the other end of the line, crying convulsively and speaking so rapidly between sobs that Sarah initially had difficulty fully understanding what was happening at home with her sick daughter. The teenager explained between seemingly endless tears that Victoria had fainted again about an hour ago, but this time the situation was much more serious because she had not been able to fully wake up even when Samantha threw cold water on her face, and that her breathing was becoming increasingly irregular, weak and spaced, while her skin was assuming a cadaverous pallor and a frightening coldness to the touch. Samantha continued her desperate account, with a voice choked by panic. "Mother, please, I beg you to come home right now. Victoria fainted again, and this time she can't wake up properly even when I call her name loudly in her ear. She's very pale, paler than I've ever seen in my life, and I'm so afraid that something terrible will happen to our little sister if you don't get home soon to take her to the hospital." Sarah felt the world collapse around her when she heard the desperation in Samantha's voice over the phone, and her legs almost gave way as she tried to process the severity of the situation unfolding in her home while she was there trying to do the right thing by returning the money that could save her daughter. Edward, who had witnessed the entire phone conversation and seen the dramatic transformation in Sarah's expression, immediately understood that this was a real medical emergency and that the honest woman who had just saved his company was now facing the possible loss of her daughter. Without hesitating for a second, Edward quickly rose from his chair, grabbed his car keys, and said with a determination that surprised even himself, "Sarah, let's go to your house right now. I'll take you in my car, and then we'll take your daughter to the best private hospital in the city. I won't let the most honest person I've ever met lose her daughter because of money. After everything you've done for me today, it's my turn to repay that unbelievable generosity." The journey to Sarah's house was a true race against time, with Edward driving his silver sedan through the city streets with an urgency he normally reserved only for his most important negotiations, while Sarah firmly held onto the passenger seat and prayed quietly that they would arrive in time to help Victoria before it was too late. During the tense 15-minute drive through the city traffic, Edward didn't stop asking questions about Victoria's medical condition, trying to better understand the severity of the situation and what treatment options were available, while Sarah explained through tears how her daughter's congenital heart disease had manifested since birth, and how the symptoms had been progressively worsening in recent months. Edward listened attentively to each word from Sarah and felt a complex mixture of admiration for the strength of this woman who had faced so many adversities alone, and a growing guilt for having initially doubted the honesty of someone who was clearly fighting an impossible battle against fate. "Mr. Edward, I don't know if I made the right decision returning this money. Perhaps God is punishing me for being too proud to accept a blessing that He placed in my path. But now I can only trust that He has a better plan for my family, even if I can't understand what that plan is." When they finally arrived at Sarah's simple house, located in a humble but dignified neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, Edward was struck by the stark contrast between the evident poverty of the place and the moral wealth of the woman he had met on that transformative morning. The small house, with walls that needed a new coat of paint and a rusty iron gate, represented a completely different world from the luxurious environment in which Edward lived. But there was something deeply human and welcoming about that home that made him reflect on what really mattered in life. Sarah immediately rushed inside the house, followed closely by Edward, and they found Samantha kneeling beside the sofa where Victoria lay unconscious, with frighteningly pale skin and irregular breathing that made the little girl's chest rise and fall in a concerning manner. Edward felt his heart tighten at the sight of the sick child, a frail girl who seemed even smaller and more fragile than her 9 years, and instantly understood that this family was facing a life-or-death struggle that they could not win alone. Samantha looked at Edward with surprise, clearly wondering who this elegant man was who had arrived with her mother. But Sarah quickly explained, "Samantha, this is Mr. Edward. He's going to help us take Victoria to a private hospital where she can receive the best possible treatment. Now let's quickly gather some of her clothes while he brings the car closer to the door." Edward ran back to his car and positioned it very close to the entrance of the house, turned the air conditioning to maximum to maintain the ideal temperature for transporting a sick child, and then returned to help Sarah and Samantha carry Victoria to the vehicle with as much care as possible to avoid worsening her delicate condition. The girl was semi-conscious, mumbling incomprehensible words and moving her head from side to side as if having nightmares, and Edward felt a wave of paternal protection that surprised him, as it had been a long time since he had felt so emotionally involved with the suffering of others. Sarah sat in the back seat holding Victoria in her lap, whispering words of comfort in her daughter's ear, while monitoring her irregular breathing and her body temperature that seemed to fluctuate between feverish and ice-cold. Samantha squeezed into the back seat next to her mother, holding Victoria's small cold hand while trying to control her own tears so as not to further alarm her sick sister. During the tense journey to the hospital, Edward kept his eyes fixed on the road, but his heart was completely focused on the family he was transporting, and he found himself saying a silent prayer, something he hadn't done in decades. "God, if you really exist and if you care for good people like this family, please don't let this innocent child die because of money. I promise I will do everything in my power to help them, even if it means spending my entire personal fortune." St. Raphael Hospital was considered the best private medical center in the region, with cutting-edge equipment and a team of specialists who only treated patients with substantial financial resources. But Edward had important connections at the institution through donations he had made over the years to maintain his social status among the city's elite. As soon as they arrived at the emergency room, Edward used his influence to ensure that Victoria received immediate care, without having to face the usual bureaucracies or the endless queues that characterize the public health system. Dr. Williams, a renowned pediatric cardiologist of approximately 45 years, with brown hair and a serious but compassionate expression, was immediately called to examine Victoria, and Edward was impressed by the speed and efficiency with which the entire medical team mobilized to address the emergency. Sarah anxiously observed every movement of the doctors and nurses around her daughter, feeling completely out of place in that sophisticated environment, but extremely grateful for finally having access to the type of medical care that Victoria had always deserved. Dr. Williams performed a detailed and complete examination using advanced diagnostic equipment that allowed for an accurate assessment of the girl's cardiac condition, and his expression became increasingly serious as he analyzed the test results. "The situation is more serious than I expected. Her cardiac condition has deteriorated significantly since the last exams you have here. I need to stabilize her immediately with specific medications, but she will need corrective heart surgery within 3 days maximum, or unfortunately, she won't be able to hold on much longer." Dr. Williams' direct and straightforward statement hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach, confirming her worst fears about the severity of Victoria's condition and the absolute urgency of the medical situation they were facing. Edward sensed Sarah's desperation and immediately approached the doctor to discuss the available treatment options, explaining that he was willing to cover all necessary medical costs, but needed to understand exactly what procedures were required and what was the realistic prognosis for the girl's complete recovery. Dr. Williams explained that the heart surgery was complex but had high chances of success if performed by a specialized team, and that the total cost of the procedure, including hospitalization, medications, and post-operative follow-up, would be around $250,000. Sarah felt a bitter irony hearing the exact amount that was in the coffin she had returned just hours earlier, but tried to maintain her faith that she had made the right decision and that God would find a way to provide the necessary resources to save her daughter. Edward noticed the tension in Sarah and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, I want to pay for this entire surgery. It's the least I can do after you saved my company and proved that there are still truly honest people in this world. The problem is that my money is temporarily blocked because of the thefts my company has suffered, but I promise I will recover these resources within 48 hours, and your daughter will have the best possible surgery." Dr. Williams managed to stabilize Victoria using a combination of specific cardiac medications and assisted oxygenation, and the girl was transferred to a private suite where she could be continuously monitored by a team of specialized nurses while awaiting surgery. Sarah stayed by the bedside, holding Victoria's hand, who now breathed more regularly, but was still very weak and pale, while Edward made phone calls to his lawyers and accountants, trying to find legal ways to release emergency funds to cover the medical costs. Samantha remained silent in an armchair near the window, divided between the relief of seeing Victoria receiving proper medical care and the concern that her family was accumulating an impossible debt to pay with people they barely knew. Sarah watched Edward talking on the phone and felt a complex mixture of deep gratitude and overwhelming guilt, questioning whether she really deserved so much generosity from a stranger and if her decision to return the found money had been an act of faith or foolish pride. She whispered a silent prayer while stroking Victoria's brown hair. "God, I trusted in you when I returned that money, believing that you would take care of my family if I did the right thing. Now I need to keep trusting, even if everything seems impossible, because I know that you never abandon those who act with honesty and true faith." Edward hung up the phone and approached Sarah with a determined but worried expression, explaining that he had managed to contact his lawyers and that they were working to find legal ways to access emergency funds, but that the process would be complicated due to ongoing investigations into the systematic thefts his company had been suffering. He told her that in the last 3 months, almost $2 million had disappeared from corporate accounts through unauthorized transfers and fraudulent investments, and that all his personal and business accounts were temporarily blocked by court order until the investigations were concluded. Sarah listened to Edward's explanations with a growing understanding that he really was facing a genuine financial crisis, despite all his appearance of wealth and power, and that his offer to help with the surgery costs was a real sacrifice and not just a symbolic gesture from a rich man. Edward sat in the chair next to Sarah and continued his explanation. "Sarah, I want you to understand that I am not making empty promises. I will really get this money for your daughter, but I first need to use the evidence you brought to identify and arrest the bastard who is stealing from my company. Once I recover the stolen funds, I can immediately transfer the necessary resources for Victoria's surgery, and she will have access to the best specialists in the country." That night, after Victoria was stabilized and sleeping peacefully under intensive medical care, Edward insisted that Sarah and Samantha go to his house to rest and eat properly, but Sarah adamantly refused to leave the hospital while her daughter was admitted. Edward respected Sarah's decision, but arranged for hot meals and clean clothes to be delivered to the hospital, so she and Samantha could remain comfortable during their vigil. While Sarah remained at Victoria's bedside, Edward returned to his office, accompanied by 2 private investigators he had hired, determined to thoroughly analyze the contents of the flash drives found in the coffin to finally identify the traitor who was destroying his life. The analysis of the electronic devices revealed an impressive amount of digital evidence, including recordings of telephone conversations, copies of confidential documents, and detailed records of all fraudulent transactions carried out over 8 months. Edward felt a mixture of relief and growing fury as he examined the evidence that would finally prove his innocence and identify the true culprit behind the crimes that had almost destroyed his reputation and his company. "I will finally discover who is the son of a bitch who has been betraying me all these months, and when I find out, I will make sure he pays for every penny stolen and every night of sleep it cost me. This person will deeply regret having messed with me and my family. As Edward and the investigators advanced in their analysis of the recordings found on the flash drives, it became increasingly clear that the volume of stolen money was much larger than Edward had initially calculated, and that the criminal scheme was much more sophisticated and systematic than he had ever imagined in his worst nightmares. The evidence revealed that the thief had created a complex network of fake bank accounts, shell companies, and fictitious investments to divert millions over nearly an entire year, using privileged access to the company's internal systems to mask the crimes as legitimate transactions approved by the board. Edward felt his anger grow exponentially as he understood the magnitude of the betrayal he had suffered, realizing that it was not just financial theft, but a calculated and malicious destruction of everything he had built during decades of honest work. The investigators explained that the evidence was sufficient not only to identify the culprit, but also to recover most of the stolen funds through legal actions and freezing offshore bank accounts. When they reached the last recording on the flash drives, Edward heard a familiar voice that made his blood run cold. "The imbecile still believes he can trust me after all these years. When I'm finished with him, he won't even have the shirt on his back." Edward immediately recognized the voice of Robert Anderson, his partner of 15 years and one of the people he trusted most in the world, and felt as if he had been stabbed in the heart. "It's not possible. Robert is like a brother to me. He was the best man at my wedding. He's the godfather of my children. How could he have betrayed me like this? How was I so blind not to notice that my best friend was destroying me behind my back all these months?" Edward immediately returned to the hospital in a state of emotional shock, needing to share the devastating discovery with Sarah and seek comfort from someone who could understand what it meant to discover that the person he trusted most in the world was trying to completely destroy him. He found Sarah still awake beside Victoria's bed, who was sleeping peacefully under the effect of heart medication, and told her with a voice choked with emotion how the evidence had revealed that Robert Anderson, his partner and best friend of 15 years, was responsible for all the thefts and the systematic campaign to destroy his company. Sarah listened to the revelation with genuine compassion, intuitively understanding the profound pain that Edward was feeling upon discovering he had been betrayed by someone so close, and offered words of comfort based on her own experience of loss and overcoming. Edward sat heavily in the armchair next to Sarah and continued his bitter account. "Robert had total access to our systems, knew all the passwords, all the security procedures, all our business strategies. He used that trust to systematically rob me, creating a scheme so complex that it took me months to realize I was being stolen from. And even then, I couldn't identify who was responsible." Sarah listened attentively to each of Edward's words, and then had a revelation that made her heart race. "Mr. Edward, may I hear that recording where he talks about hiding the evidence? Because I think I recognize that voice. It might be the same voice of the man I saw at the dump that early morning." Edward played the specific recording where Robert talked about hiding the evidence at the dump, and Sarah closed her eyes to better concentrate on the voice that had marked that fateful dawn that completely changed the course of her life and her daughter's lives. The sound of Robert's arrogant and calculating voice echoed through the silent office, and Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine as she mentally relived the scene of the elegant man burying the coffin in the midst of rain and darkness. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Edward with an absolute certainty that left no room for doubt. "Mr. Edward, I can swear on my deceased husband's soul that this is exactly the same voice I heard that early morning at the dump. It's the voice of the man I saw burying the coffin and talking on the phone about you never finding the evidence. Robert Anderson is definitely the man who was at the dump, trying to get rid of the proof of the crimes he committed against your company." Edward felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet upon hearing Sarah's definitive confirmation, and an explosive mixture of anger, sadness, and betrayal took hold of his heart, like a poison spreading through his veins. 15 years of friendship, 15 years of absolute trust, and he betrayed me in this cowardly and calculating way, planning my complete destruction as if I were his worst enemy instead of someone who always treated him like a brother. Edward and Sarah spent the rest of the night immersed in a meticulous and obsessive investigation, analyzing each recording, each document, each financial record contained in the flash drives, methodically assembling a complex puzzle that revealed the truly frightening extent of the systematic betrayal that Robert had orchestrated against his best friend and partner. The recordings showed Robert conversing with international contacts about bank transfers to tax havens, negotiating the sale of confidential company information to competitors, and even planning ways to incriminate Edward for the very crimes he was committing. Sarah listened to each recording with a mixture of horror and compassion, seeing how Edward physically contracted with each new revelation about the depth of the betrayal he had suffered, and offering words of comfort whenever she perceived he was about to emotionally collapse. During one of the most shocking recordings, Robert spoke disdainfully about Edward. "This idiot believes everything I say. After so many years seeing me as a saint, he'll never suspect that I'm stealing every cent I can from the company accounts. When I'm done with him, he'll be so indebted and demoralized that he won't even have the courage to show his face in society." Edward abruptly stopped the recording and punched the table with such force that it made Sarah jump in fright. How was I so blind? How did I not realize that he was studying me, manipulating me, destroying me bit by bit during all these months? I trusted him with my life, with my family, with my most intimate secrets. As they advanced in their analysis of the digital evidence, it became clear that Robert had created an extremely sophisticated criminal operation that involved not only the direct theft of company funds, but also a complex network of shell companies registered in countries with permissive banking laws, fictitious contracts with non-existent suppliers, and fraudulent investments in projects that never really existed. Edward discovered with growing horror that Robert had used his power of attorney and his trust to sign documents transferring valuable company properties to corporations secretly controlled by him, and that he had manipulated financial reports to hide the losses for months while continuing to systematically steal. Sarah watched Edward analyze each document with an almost obsessive dedication and realized that he was using that investigation as a way to emotionally process the devastating betrayal he had discovered, channeling his pain into a relentless pursuit of justice and recovery. The evidence showed that Robert had transferred approximately $3.5 million to accounts in tax havens over 10 months, an amount that represented almost all of the company's capital reserve and the personal investments that Edward had accumulated during 2 decades of work. Edward looked at Sarah with tired, teary eyes. "Sarah, you saved more than my company when you brought this evidence. You saved my mental sanity and my faith in justice. Without these proofs, I would probably have gone mad trying to figure out who was destroying me, or worse, I would have started to suspect innocent people like my secretary or my other employees." During the early hours, while they continued the exhaustive analysis of the evidence, Edward received a call from Samantha that left him even more concerned about the urgency of Victoria's medical situation. The teenager explained that the hospital nurses had commented that Victoria had experienced some arrhythmia episodes during the night, and that Dr. Williams was considering moving up the surgery if medications couldn't completely stabilize the girl's heartbeat. Sarah felt panic take over her heart upon hearing that Victoria's condition might be deteriorating, even under intensive medical care, and Edward realized he needed to accelerate his plans to confront Robert and recover the stolen funds before it was too late to save the daughter of the woman who had saved his business life. Edward made several calls to his lawyers during the early hours, explaining the situation and requesting that they prepare all the necessary legal documentation to immediately freeze Robert's bank accounts and initiate the processes to recover the illegally transferred funds. Sarah remained by Edward's side during all these tense calls, offering moral support and sharing the anguish of knowing that time was passing quickly while Victoria fought for her life in the hospital. "Edward, I know that discovering this betrayal must be breaking your heart, but now we need to focus on recovering that money as quickly as possible to save my daughter. Robert has done enough harm. We cannot let him continue hurting innocent people like Victoria." The evidence revealed that Robert had scheduled a crucial meeting for the next day with foreign investors from a financial group based in the Cayman Islands, apparently to finalize the transfer of the last resources that were still in accounts controlled by Edward's company. The documents showed that Robert had planned this meeting as his last big score before completely disappearing from the country, transferring approximately 2 additional millions that he had not yet managed to steal through a fake investment contract he had meticulously prepared. Edward understood that this meeting represented his only real opportunity to confront Robert with the evidence, force him to confess his crimes, and most importantly, recover the funds necessary to pay for Victoria's surgery before it was too late. Sarah felt a mixture of hope and terror upon realizing that everything would depend on that final confrontation with the man who had tried to destroy Edward and who, indirectly, was putting Victoria's life at risk through his criminal actions. Edward carefully studied the details of the scheduled meeting and developed a plan to arrive before the foreign investors and confront Robert when he was alone and vulnerable. "Sarah, this is our only real chance to recover the money in time to save Victoria, but it's also extremely dangerous because Robert may react violently when he discovers he's been found out. He has a lot to lose, and desperate men can do anything to protect their interests." Edward spent the early hours developing a detailed strategy for the confrontation with Robert, considering all possibilities and preparing for different scenarios that could unfold during that decisive encounter. He explained to Sarah that he had known Robert for so long that he could predict some of his reactions, but that the discovery of the betrayal had shown that perhaps he had never really known his partner and best friend as he thought. Sarah listened attentively as Edward detailed his plan, feeling growing admiration for how he was channeling his emotional pain into an iron determination to obtain justice and recover the resources needed to save Victoria. Edward discreetly contacted some private investigators and lawyers he trusted, requesting them to position themselves strategically near the meeting location to serve as witnesses and security backup during the confrontation. Sarah insisted on accompanying Edward during the confrontation, arguing that her presence could be crucial both to confirm Robert's identification as the man from the dump and to psychologically pressure the traitor with the testimony of someone who had witnessed his criminal actions. "Edward, I need to be there when you confront this man, not just because it was through me that you discovered the truth, but because I need to look him in the eyes and have absolute certainty that he is really the person I saw that dawn. Besides, perhaps my presence will make him realize that his actions have consequences in the lives of innocent people like my daughter." As dawn approached, Edward made the final decision to call the police as security backup for the confrontation with Robert, explaining to Sarah that he couldn't risk the situation getting out of control and resulting in violence that could harm their chances of recovering the stolen money. He contacted a trusted police chief, someone who had worked on financial crime cases and would understand the complexity of the situation, briefly explaining the evidence he had discovered and requesting discreet police support during the meeting with Robert. Sarah fully supported Edward's decision to involve the authorities, understanding that recovering the stolen funds was more important than any consideration of personal pride or desire for private revenge. Edward organized all the flash drives, documents, and recordings in chronological order, preparing a complete dossier that could be presented both to Robert during the confrontation and to the police authorities if it became necessary to arrest the traitor immediately. During the final preparations, Edward reflected on the 15 years of friendship he had lost and how Robert had manipulated every moment of trust and intimacy to plan his destruction. "Sarah, what hurts me the most isn't even the money he stole, but realizing that during all these years he was studying my weaknesses, my vulnerable points, planning how to destroy me in the most efficient way possible. Every conversation we had, every confidence I shared, every moment of vulnerability I showed, he was storing all of this as ammunition to use against me." As the sun began to rise, Edward and Sarah were mentally and emotionally exhausted from the night of intense investigation, but also determined to confront Robert and recover the funds needed to save Victoria before the medical deadline expired. Edward checked once more all the details of the meeting scheduled by Robert, confirmed that the private investigators and police would be discreetly positioned near the location, and reviewed his confrontation strategy that should be assertive enough to force Robert to cooperate, but controlled enough to prevent him from fleeing or reacting violently. Sarah psychologically prepared herself to face the man who had caused so much indirect suffering to her family, mentally practicing how she would describe exactly what she had witnessed that dawn at the dump when Robert tried to dispose of the evidence of his crimes. They were about to leave the office toward the meeting location when Edward's phone rang with an urgency that made both of them freeze in fear. It was Dr. Williams calling directly from the hospital, and his voice was laden with medical concern that he couldn't hide. "Mr. Edward, I need to speak urgently about Victoria's condition. During the night, she had several episodes of severe arrhythmia, and despite the medications, her condition is deteriorating more rapidly than I expected. We need to perform the heart surgery tomorrow morning, or unfortunately, I cannot guarantee that she will be able to hold on much longer." Dr. Williams' urgent call transformed the already palpable tension into pure despair, and Edward felt the crushing weight of responsibility, knowing that Victoria's life depended directly on his ability to confront Robert and recover the stolen funds in the next crucial hours. Sarah firmly held Edward's arm with a strength that revealed her absolute maternal determination, and said with a courage that surprised even herself, "Mr. Edward, now we no longer have time for elaborate plans or complicated strategies. We need to confront Robert immediately and force him to return that money before it's too late for my precious daughter." Edward agreed with the absolute urgency of the situation and immediately called the sheriff, explaining in a tense voice that he needed to advance the operation due to the medical emergency that couldn't wait even one more minute, and requesting that agents position themselves discreetly around the company building where Robert had scheduled the meeting with foreign investors. Sarah watched Edward speak on the phone and felt a complex mixture of hope and terror, knowing that this confrontation represented the last real chance to save Victoria before it was too late. "Sarah, I solemnly promise that we will leave this meeting with the money needed to save Victoria, even if I have to threaten Robert with immediate arrest or complete destruction of his reputation and his entire future. He won't escape this time, not after everything we've discovered about his heinous crimes against our company and indirectly against your innocent family." Edward and Sarah arrived at the company building still in the dark dawn, using Edward's privileged access to enter directly into the meeting room on the 15th floor, where Robert had scheduled the meeting with foreign investors who didn't know they were participating in an elaborate and sophisticated criminal scheme. The room was equipped with a state-of-the-art recording system that Edward discreetly activated, ensuring that all of Robert's words would be registered as additional, irrefutable evidence for the judicial proceedings that would inevitably follow. Sarah strategically positioned herself in a less visible area of the room, but from where she could clearly observe Robert when he arrived, and definitively confirm that he was the same man she had seen at the dump on that fateful dawn that had changed their lives forever. Edward meticulously verified that the flash drives with all the criminal evidence were organized in perfect chronological order on the meeting table, creating a devastating visual presentation that would leave Robert without any possibility of denial or desperate escape. When they heard Robert's confident footsteps approaching down the silent corridor, Edward whispered to Sarah with iron determination, "Now the definitive hour of truth and justice has arrived. This miserable man will have to face all the grave consequences of his criminal actions and betrayals. For Victoria, for my destroyed family, for all the innocent people he has harmed with his sick greed, today justice will finally be served completely and irrevocably." Robert entered the meeting room with his usual confidence and a fake smile that he had used for years to systematically deceive Edward, wearing an expensive custom-made suit and carrying an Italian leather briefcase that probably contained carefully prepared fraudulent documents to deceive the innocent foreign investors. When he saw Edward sitting at the table with a serious expression and Sarah standing near the panoramic window, Robert hesitated for a perceptible moment, clearly surprised by the unexpected presence of both at such an unusual hour, but quickly recovered his artificial composure and tried to maintain the facade of normality that he had perfected during years of betrayal. Edward rose slowly like a predator preparing to attack, and fixed Robert with a penetrating gaze that left no doubt about the extreme gravity of the situation. "Good morning, Robert. I imagine you are genuinely surprised to find us here at this early hour, but I sincerely believe it was time we had a very frank and definitive conversation about the criminal business you have been secretly conducting in recent months." Robert forced a nervous smile that couldn't completely hide his growing anxiety and tried to maintain his deteriorating performance of a loyal partner. "Edward, what an unexpected surprise to see you here so early. And who is this mysterious lady?" I don't remember us scheduling any important meeting before the investors arrived for our presentation. Sarah took a firm step forward and said with a controlled voice but loaded with determination, "I am Sarah Johnson, Mr. Robert, and I am absolutely and unshakably certain that you remember me very well, even if you didn't clearly see my face on that rainy dawn when you were cowardly burying a coffin in the municipal dump to hide the evidence of your crimes against Edward." The specific and detailed mention of the dump and the coffin made Robert's face visibly pale as if he had seen a ghost, and Edward observed with bitter and righteous satisfaction how his ex-best friend's mask of confidence began to dramatically crumble in the face of irrefutable evidence that his crimes had been discovered and documented. Robert tried to maintain desperate denial. "I absolutely know nothing about what you're talking about. I've never been to any dump in my life, and I don't know this woman from anywhere." Edward smiled coldly with a satisfaction he had been waiting to feel for months and began to play the most incriminating recordings from the flash drives, and Robert's unmistakable voice echoed through the room, confessing his crimes in detail and cruelly boasting about how he was systematically destroying Edward. As the recordings inexorably continued, showing Robert planning fraudulent million-dollar transfers and mocking Edward's blind trust with absolute disdain, the traitor gradually realized that there was no longer any possibility of denial or escape from the overwhelming reality of the facts. Sarah watched Robert attentively like a determined witness and said with total conviction, "Mr. Robert, that is exactly the same voice I heard on the phone that dawn when you said with such arrogance that Edward would never find the evidence you were burying in the trash like a common criminal." Edward dramatically stopped the recording and approached Robert with measured steps. 15 years, Robert. 15 years of true and unconditional friendship on my part. 15 years of absolute and blind trust. And you used every moment of that intimacy to betray me in the most cowardly, calculating, and cruel way possible. Now I want you to explain to me with brutal honesty why you did this to me. Why you destroyed our solid friendship and our prosperous company out of pure sick greed and pathological envy. Robert finally realized that he was completely cornered, and that there was no longer any realistic possibility of maintaining his elaborate lies in the face of the overwhelming and irrefutable evidence that Edward had methodically presented, so he decided to completely abandon the mask of loyalty he had worn for years and reveal his true dark nature that he had carefully hidden for so long. He sat heavily in one of the chairs at the conference table, like a defeated man, and looked at Edward with an explosive mixture of anger, hatred, and contempt that shocked even Sarah, who had witnessed many difficult and traumatic situations in her life, but had never seen so much calculating coldness and malice concentrated in a single person. Robert began to speak in a calm voice, but loaded with distilled venom. "You want to know the absolute truth, Edward? The naked truth is that I have always deeply hated you. From the first day we met in college when you arrived with your natural arrogance and aristocratic superiority. You always had everything served on a silver platter. You were always the professor's favorite because of your privileged last name. You always got the best internships and the best opportunities through your rich family's powerful connections." Edward felt as if he had taken a devastating punch to the stomach upon hearing those words loaded with pure hatred from someone he considered a blood brother. It was time someone knocked you off your golden pedestal, Edward. It was time for you to discover in practice what it's like to really fight, what it's like to feel the despair of seeing everything you built crumbling bit by bit without being able to stop it. I planned each move with surgical precision, each fraudulent transfer, each forged document, and I must admit it was extremely satisfying to see you desperate looking for invisible culprits while the real thief was sitting by your side during all the important meetings pretending loyalty. Sarah was genuinely horrified by the frightening coldness and total lack of remorse in Robert's venomous words, realizing that she was facing a determined man who had dedicated precious years of his life to meticulously planning the complete destruction of someone who considered him a true and loyal friend. Edward tried to control his explosive emotions and maintain absolute focus on urgently recovering the funds needed to save Victoria. "Robert, regardless of your sick and pathological motives, you stole millions from our prosperous company, and now you need to return everything immediately without any hesitation. An innocent child is literally dying in the hospital at this exact moment because you decided to satisfy your pathological envy by stealing the money that could save her. Robert laughed with a cruelty that made Sarah deeply shudder. "Ah, so now you're concerned about poor and needy children? What an interesting and convenient coincidence, Edward. You never genuinely cared about anyone besides yourself and your privileged family during all these years of our partnership." Robert crossed his arms and smiled with pure malice. "Go ahead, Edward. Call the federal police if you have the courage, because even if they arrest me immediately, you'll never recover the money in time to save that poor child, and you'll have to live forever knowing that your blind trust and naivety were directly responsible for an innocent's death." Edward realized that Robert was determined to cause maximum damage, even while being discovered and facing inevitable imprisonment. So he strategically decided to reveal that he had already contacted the competent authorities and that Robert's arrest was just a matter of minutes. He explained with growing satisfaction that all offshore bank accounts where Robert had carefully hidden the stolen funds were already being tracked by federal specialists in international financial crimes, and that court orders for immediate blocking and emergency transfer of resources were already being processed by the competent courts. Robert felt his arrogant confidence dangerously falter when he realized that Edward had intelligently anticipated his moves and that his carefully planned escape was rapidly crumbling before his eyes. Edward continued pressing psychologically with pleasure. "Federal investigators have already identified all your secret offshore accounts, all the shell companies you created internationally, all the fraudulent investments you used to hide the stolen money." Sarah observed the tense exchange between the two men and decided to appeal directly to any microscopic trace of humanity that might exist in Robert's black heart. "Mr. Robert, regardless of the personal and professional problems you have with Edward, my daughter Victoria is a completely innocent child of only 9 years who has never harmed anyone in her life and who will tragically die if we can't get the money for her complex heart surgery in the next critical hours. Will you really let an innocent child die just to cruelly revenge yourself on someone?" Robert looked at Sarah with glacial indifference that revealed his truly monstrous nature. "Madam, your dramatic family problems are not my responsibility in any way, and if Edward had been more careful and competent with his business, your daughter wouldn't be in this desperate situation. The blame is exclusively his, not mine." At that exact dramatic moment, the double doors of the meeting room violently opened, and 3 armed federal police agents quickly entered, accompanied by the chief detective, who had been monitoring the entire situation through electronic listening equipment that Edward had previously authorized. Robert desperately tried to stand up and run toward the panoramic window, but was quickly immobilized by the trained agents who were already prepared for his possible desperate escape attempt. The detective approached Robert with authority and formally said, "Robert Anderson, you are officially under arrest for aggravated theft, international financial fraud, money laundering, criminal conspiracy, and currency evasion. You have the constitutional right to remain silent and to contact a lawyer of your choice." Robert fought violently against the steel handcuffs and shouted at Edward with distilled hatred, "You think you've won this battle, Edward? Even if they arrest me today, you'll never be able to undo all the deep harm I've caused to your company and your reputation. I'll drag you down with me to rock bottom." Edward completely ignored Robert's empty threats and immediately addressed the chief inspector. "We urgently need the blocking and transfer orders for the funds to be executed immediately. We have a medical emergency that depends entirely on recovering these resources." The inspector professionally confirmed that the legal proceedings were already in accelerated progress and that the responsible banks had been notified to process the emergency transfers as soon as the court orders were finalized. "Mr. Edward, within 2 hours all the stolen funds will be back in the company's original accounts, and you will be able to access the necessary resources for any emergency you are facing." While Robert was being escorted out of the room by federal agents, Edward finally felt momentary but profound relief, knowing that justice was being properly served and that the stolen funds would be recovered in time to pay for Victoria's heart surgery. Sarah hugged Edward with tears of sincere gratitude in her eyes, emotionally understanding that this brave confrontation had saved not only Edward's company, but especially the precious life of her daughter who was fighting against time in the hospital. Edward returned the maternal hug and said, deeply moved, "Sarah, without your extraordinary honesty in returning that chest, Robert would have managed to escape with everything, and we would never have discovered the truth about the systematic thefts. You not only saved my company, you saved my mental sanity and my faith in humanity." They were celebrating Robert's well-deserved arrest and the recovery of the funds when Sarah's cell phone rang with the characteristic urgency of an absolute medical emergency. Sarah quickly answered, with her heart already racing with instinctive fear, and heard Samantha's completely desperate voice on the other end of the line. "Mom, please come to the hospital immediately." They rushed Victoria into emergency surgery because she had a severe cardiac arrest, and the doctors said they couldn't wait even one more minute. Edward heard the desperation in Samantha's voice through the phone and immediately understood that even though they had recovered the money, they might be arriving too late to save Victoria. "Sarah, let's go to the hospital right now. I'll call Dr. Williams on the way and ensure he has all the resources necessary to save your daughter." Edward and Sarah desperately ran through the building corridors toward the parking lot, with Edward making urgent calls to Dr. Williams during the journey to inform him that the funds for the surgery had been recovered and that all necessary medical resources were authorized without any spending limit. The race to the hospital was a true fight against relentless time, with Edward driving at maximum speed through the city streets, while Sarah prayed incessantly that they would arrive in time to see Victoria before she was taken to the operating room. During the tense journey, Edward maintained constant contact with the hospital through the car's speakerphone system, receiving critical updates on Victoria's condition and ensuring that Dr. Williams had official confirmation that all surgery costs would be fully covered. Sarah held her hands firmly together in desperate prayer, murmuring silent promises to God and asking forgiveness for having doubted her decision to return the money found in the landfill. When they finally arrived at the hospital, they ran through the corridors toward the surgical center, where they found Samantha crying convulsively in the arms of a nurse who was trying to comfort her. Sarah desperately hugged Samantha and asked about Victoria's critical condition, but before the teenager could respond, Dr. Williams came out of the surgical preparation room with a grave expression that made Sarah's heart stop beating. "Sarah, Edward, I need to speak with you about Victoria's extremely critical condition." During preparation for surgery, she went into cardiac arrest due to the extreme stress that her fragile heart couldn't withstand, and despite all our medical efforts to resuscitate her, the situation is extremely grave. Dr. Williams paused for a moment, clearly struggling to find the appropriate words for such a delicate situation. "We've done everything we could with the available equipment, but unfortunately her heart is very weak and you need to prepare yourselves psychologically for the possibility that we might not be able to save her, even with surgery." Dr. Williams' devastating words echoed through the hospital corridor like a death sentence, and Sarah felt her legs weaken as she tried to process the possibility of losing Victoria just when she had finally secured the money to save her through so much suffering and hardship. Edward held Sarah firmly by the shoulders and looked directly into the tired eyes of the doctor. "Doctor, now we have all the financial resources needed, the best equipment available in the country, the best specialized medical team. Do everything humanly possible to save this precious child, because she represents much more than just a life. She represents the unwavering faith of a mother who made the right choice even when it seemed impossible and everyone around thought she was crazy." Dr. Williams took a deep breath and explained that despite the frightening cardiac arrest, Victoria had partially responded to advanced resuscitation medications and that he was assembling an exceptional team of 5 renowned specialists to perform a complex emergency heart surgery that would last at least 12 consecutive hours of intense work. Sarah held Samantha's hands, which were trembling uncontrollably with fear, and whispered a silent prayer. "Almighty God, I trusted you when I returned that money, even knowing it could immediately save my daughter. Now I need to trust even more that you will save my dear girl. If it is your holy will, may she live to testify that doing right is always worth it, even when everything seems lost and hopeless." Dr. Williams immediately mobilized the best medical team available at the hospital, including 2 pediatric cardiologists specialized in critical cases with decades of experience, a renowned anesthesiologist with specific experience in complex pediatric cardiac surgeries, 3 specialized nurses who had worked in similar extreme emergency cases, and a perfusionist specialized in extracorporeal circulation for children. Edward authorized all possible medical expenses without any financial limitation, including the urgent importation of specialized equipment from other hospitals in the region and the hiring of international medical consultants via video conference to remotely assist in the surgery. Sarah remained in the waiting room during the 12 longest and most anguishing hours of her life, alternating between moments of intense prayer and comforting conversations with Edward, who had cancelled all his business commitments to never leave her alone during that desperate vigil. Samantha remained courageously by her mother's side, showing impressive maturity for her 15 years, offering words of comfort and keeping hope alive even in the darkest moments of the endless night. During the first 6 critical hours of surgery, Dr. Williams briefly came out to update the anxious family. The surgery is progressing as expected. Considering the severity of the initial situation, we have managed to temporarily stabilize her heart rhythm, and now we're working on correcting the defective valve. Victoria is an extraordinarily strong girl, fighting like a true warrior against all adversities, and this gives us real hope that we will be able to completely save her and return her healed to you. As the hours passed slowly like centuries of agony, Edward took the time to explain in detail to Sarah how he intended to completely reorganize his company and personal life after the shocking revelations about Robert, speaking extensively about how that traumatic experience had radically transformed his perspective on fundamental values, human trust, and the true meaning of success in life. He emotionally recounted how he had realized that all his accumulated material wealth meant nothing if not accompanied by absolute personal integrity and genuine relationships with people of exceptional character like Sarah. Sarah listened attentively to every word and shared her own profound reflections on how that journey had tested her faith in an extreme and painful way, but had also conclusively demonstrated that God truly rewards those who do the right thing, even when it costs very dearly personally. Edward turned to Sarah with a serious and determined expression. "Sarah, I want to make a proposal that will completely change your life for the better, but only if Victoria comes out of this surgery with complete success. I want you to come work with me as the Director of Social Responsibility for the company, creating innovative programs to help needy families like yours." Sarah felt her heart race with the unexpected generosity and responded emotionally. "Mr. Edward, I don't know if I deserve such trust and responsibility, but I solemnly promise that if God saves my daughter from this terrible ordeal, I will dedicate my entire life to helping other people who go through the same desperate difficulties that we faced." After 12 intense hours of complex surgery that tested the limits of modern medicine and human endurance, Dr. Williams finally left the operating room with a tired but hopeful smile that made Sarah faint with complete relief in Edward's secure arms. The doctor explained in detail that the surgery had been a complete and extraordinary success, that all necessary cardiac corrections had been performed with absolute technical perfection, and that Victoria was stable and breathing normally for the first time in many years of suffering. Edward hugged Sarah and Samantha, while they all cried tears of deep gratitude and immense relief, understanding that they had truly witnessed a medical miracle that was only possible due to the perfect combination of abundant financial resources, exceptional medical expertise, and mainly, Sarah's unwavering faith throughout the ordeal. Dr. Williams continued explaining that Victoria would need a few weeks of careful hospital recovery, followed by months of rigorous medical follow-up, but that with proper care, she could lead a completely normal and healthy life without any limitation. Sarah held Dr. Williams's hands with deep gratitude. "Doctor, there aren't enough words in the Portuguese language to thank you for what you did for my family today. You literally gave life back to my daughter when all seemed lost." Dr. Williams smiled modestly. "Sarah, your spiritual strength and determination were fundamental to this medical success, and Mr. Edward's extraordinary generosity in providing the best possible resources made all the difference in our ability to completely save Victoria." In the 6 months following Victoria's miraculously successful surgery, Sarah's life underwent a complete and radical transformation that she had never imagined possible, even in her most optimistic dreams, but which she conducted while always maintaining her natural humility and her fundamental values completely intact. Edward religiously fulfilled his promise and appointed Sarah as the Director of Social Responsibility for his completely rebuilt and renewed company, offering her a dignified and generous salary that allowed the family to definitively escape extreme poverty without losing their essence, identity, and connection to their humble origins. Sarah used her new strategic position to create innovative and effective social programs to assist needy families, including full scholarships for talented but resourceless children, emergency medical assistance for urgent cases, professional training programs for people in situations of social vulnerability, and income generation projects for single mothers in difficulties. Robert was finally tried and sentenced to 15 years in closed prison for multiple serious federal crimes, including qualified theft, international money laundering, sophisticated financial fraud, organized crime formation, and currency evasion, losing all the luxurious assets he had acquired with criminally stolen money. Edward managed to recover an impressive 95% of the diverted funds through efficient judicial processes and used a significant part of these resources to establish a permanent charitable foundation in the name of Sarah and Victoria. Edward, I never imagined in my life that my simple decision to return that coffin could result in so many extraordinary blessings for my family and for hundreds of other needy people. Sarah frequently reflected with admiration, God really has a perfect and detailed plan for our lives, even when we can't understand absolutely anything of what He is doing with us during the most difficult moments. Sarah gradually but completely adapted to her new professional and social life, but made an absolute point of maintaining her cultural roots and never forgetting where she had originally come from, consciously using her painful personal experience of extreme poverty and desperate struggle to better understand and effectively help families served by the company's comprehensive social programs. She moved with her daughters to a modest but comfortable and welcoming house in a respectable middle-class neighborhood, ensuring that Samantha and Victoria had access to superior quality education in reputable private schools, but always emphasizing daily the fundamental importance of values such as honesty, humility, compassion for the less fortunate, and social responsibility. Samantha flourished academically in an impressive way and decided to follow the path of medicine, to follow in the inspiring footsteps of Dr. Williams, deeply motivated by the traumatic experience of almost losing her sister and by the exceptional medical dedication that had saved Victoria when everything seemed impossible. Victoria, completely healed and overflowing with vibrant energy and contagious joy of living, became an extroverted, affectionate and communicative child who loved to proudly tell everyone she met about how her mother was the bravest, most honest and wonderful person in the entire world. Edward also went through a profound and lasting personal transformation, learning to value authentic and meaningful relationships instead of superficial connections based solely on financial interest, social status, or business convenience. Sarah, working daily with you has taught me that true success in life is not measured by bank account or accumulated wealth, but by the positive and lasting impact we cause in the lives of other needy people. Edward frequently declared with conviction, "You gave back to me not just the criminal evidence of the thefts, but also my faith in genuine human goodness and the real possibility of building prosperous businesses based on solid ethical principles and social responsibility." During the final 2 months of preparation, Edward decided to inaugurate a free modern medical center exclusively specialized in caring for underprivileged children with complex heart problems, directly inspired by the touching story of Sarah and her daughter Victoria. The center was equipped with the most modern diagnostic and treatment devices available on the international market, including state-of-the-art equipment specially imported to address complex cases, and had a team of highly qualified volunteer doctors led by Dr. Williams himself, who enthusiastically accepted the challenge of directing the innovative philanthropic institution. Sarah worked tirelessly for weeks on the meticulous organization of the inauguration event, inviting local authorities, influential regional business people, and most importantly, hundreds of underprivileged families who would directly benefit from the medical services offered free of charge by the center. The inauguration day was marked by a deeply moving ceremony that brought together more than 500 people, including many families that Sarah had personally helped through Edward's company's comprehensive social programs. Victoria, radiant with perfect health and wearing a light blue dress that highlighted her bright eyes and contagious smile, symbolically cut the inaugural ribbon alongside Sarah, representing the concrete hope that other children would have exactly the same opportunity for miraculous healing that she had received. "Mommy, is it true that this hospital will help poor children like I was before the surgery?" Victoria asked with innocent curiosity. Sarah responded with tears of maternal pride in her eyes. "Yes, my dear daughter, and so many other mothers won't have to go through the terrible despair that I went through when you were sick and I had no money to help you." During the official inauguration ceremony, Edward gave an emotional and deeply inspiring speech that perfectly summarized the extraordinary journey that had led to the creation of the medical center and the radical transformation of all lives involved in that admirable story of honesty, faith, and human redemption. He spoke extensively about how Sarah had courageously risked her own daughter's life to do the morally right thing, returning a considerable fortune that could have immediately solved all her financial problems, but choosing to trust in God and divine justice instead of yielding to the natural temptation of easy money. Edward described in detail how Sarah's radical and unwavering honesty had not only saved his company from complete bankruptcy and his reputation from total destruction, but had also revealed Robert's cowardly betrayal and allowed justice to be done in a complete and satisfactory manner. The businessman continued explaining how that transformative experience had fundamentally changed his worldview and had inspired him to use his recovered wealth to substantially benefit the community through meaningful and lasting social projects. "Sarah taught me that doing the right thing is always rewarded by God, even when it seems impossible and everyone around thinks we are crazy for giving up immediate material advantages. Her extraordinary honesty not only saved my company from ruin, but completely changed my view of the world and the true purpose of wealth." Edward concluded emotionally, "This medical center exists because a brave and principled woman chose honesty instead of convenience, faith instead of fear, and justice instead of selfish self-interest." Sarah listened to Edward's touching speech with deep emotion, vividly remembering each painful moment of that difficult journey that had begun with an unexpected discovery in the dump and culminated in that glorious day of celebration and hope for many needy families in the region. She watched Victoria playing happily with other children in the flowery garden of the medical center, running and laughing with a vibrant and contagious energy that dramatically contrasted with the fragile and pale girl who had almost tragically lost months before. Samantha was animatedly talking with Dr. Williams about her ambitious plans to study medicine, demonstrating an admirable determination to dedicate her future life to helping other people just as her family had been generously helped. Sarah reflected deeply on how each decision she had made during that crisis, honestly returning the money, completely trusting Edward, maintaining her faith even in the most desperate moments, had contributed to creating an extraordinary outcome that benefited not only her family, but the entire regional community. When it was her turn to speak to the attentive audience, Sarah approached the microphone with genuine humility. "I am not a heroine as Mr. Edward generously said, "I am just an ordinary mother who tried to do what I considered right before God, even when it seemed impossible and counterproductive." She continued with a voice choked with emotion, "If my simple story can inspire other people to choose honesty, even when it is extremely difficult and costly, then all the suffering we went through will have been completely worthwhile." After the official ceremony and inspiring speeches, Sarah walked alone through the tranquil garden of the medical center, carefully observing the families who were getting to know the modern facilities and medical services that would be available free of charge for their sick children. She vividly remembered how she had felt desperate and completely powerless when she discovered that Victoria urgently needed heart surgery that cost more than she could earn in an entire lifetime of hard and dedicated work. Sarah thought emotionally about the other mothers who would no longer have to go through the devastating anguish of seeing their children suffering without having financial resources for adequate medical treatment, and felt a deep and lasting gratitude for having been chosen by God as an instrument of such a significant and comprehensive transformation. She looked at the blue sky of the sunny afternoon and whispered a sincere prayer of thanks. "Thank you, Almighty Lord, for showing me that true faith and honesty always win in the end, even when the path seems impossible to travel and everyone doubts our decisions. Thank you for transforming our pain into concrete hope for other needy families." At that special moment, Victoria ran energetically toward her from the playground where she was playing with other children, with cheeks rosy from running and a radiant smile that lit up the entire garden. "Mom, you are the bravest person I know," declared Victoria, hugging Sarah with all her strength. "The teacher said that you saved not only me, but many other children too." Sarah embraced Victoria with infinite love and felt a deep and lasting peace knowing that her daughter had not only miraculously survived, but completely thrived in every aspect, and that her personal story of honesty had created a lasting legacy that would benefit future generations of needy families in the region and beyond. She observed Edward enthusiastically talking with Dr. Williams about the ambitious expansion plans for the medical center, including the concrete possibility of creating similar units in other cities in the region, exponentially multiplying the positive impact of the social project. Samantha approached the two with a mature smile and said with impressive maturity, "Mom, I am very proud of you for teaching all of us that doing the right thing is always worth it, even when it costs so much personally and financially." Sarah smiled tenderly and replied, "My dear daughters, you are the greatest treasure I could ask God for in my entire life, and knowing that you have learned the right values is infinitely more important than any material wealth we could have." As the sun set majestically on the horizon, painting the sky with spectacular golden and pink hues, Sarah reflected on how the honesty of a simple woman had transformed not only her own family life, but had created a virtuous cycle of hope and integrity that benefited the entire regional community and would continue to expand. Honesty really works, Sarah thought with total conviction. Not necessarily in the way we expect or in the time we want, but always in a way that exceeds our most optimistic expectations. She knew with certainty that the medical center was just the beginning of a profound social transformation that would continue to grow and touch lives for many years to come, conclusively proving that a single courageous and honest decision can change the world forever. The golden dawn illuminated the windows of the Sarah Johnson Children's Medical Center when Samantha arrived for another day of work as a pediatric cardiologist, a position she had earned through years of dedicated studies and that she considered not just a profession, but a life mission, inspired by the traumatic experience of almost losing her sister in childhood. At 25, Samantha had become one of the most respected doctors in the region, known both for her exceptional technical competence and her genuine compassion for the underprivileged families they served at the free center that bore her mother's name. As she walked through the familiar corridors where she had spent so many moments of anguish as a child, Samantha reflected on how her life had taken a direction she could never have imagined, but that seemed to have been traced by destiny since that terrible night when she almost lost Victoria. She stopped before the picture at the main entrance that showed Sarah cutting the inauguration ribbon next to a smiling and healthy Victoria and whispered a silent prayer. "Thank you, God, for giving me the opportunity to save other children, as my sister was saved. May I never forget that all this began with my mother's honesty and faith." Sarah, now 46, had become a legendary figure in the community as Director of Social Responsibility for Edward's company, creating and supervising programs that had transformed hundreds of lives over the past decade. She maintained her intense work routine, visiting underprivileged families, organizing social assistance campaigns, and coordinating the expansion of educational and health programs that had spread to 5 cities in the region. However, in recent weeks, Sarah had been feeling unusual fatigue and chest pains that secretly worried her, but which she carefully hid from her daughters to avoid causing unnecessary alarm. Her experience as a mother had taught her that sometimes it was necessary to carry worries alone to protect those she loved, and she didn't want Samantha and Victoria to be distracted from their own promising lives because of problems she hoped were temporary. During a morning meeting with Edward about the expansion of social programs, Sarah felt a sharp pain in her chest that made her discreetly lean on the table. "Edward, I think we need to accelerate the project for the new center in Santos. There are many children there waiting for our help." Edward noticed the sudden paleness on Sarah's face. "Sarah, are you all right? You've seemed a bit tired lately. Perhaps you should get some routine tests done." Victoria, now a 19-year-old studying business administration with a focus on management of social organizations, had grown to become a more extroverted and energetic version of her mother, carrying within her a profound gratitude for the second chance at life she had received, and an iron determination to honor the sacrifice Sarah had made for her. She worked part-time at the medical center, helping organize community programs, and had developed a special intuition for identifying families in need, using her own experience of poverty and illness to genuinely connect with the people served. During an afternoon of volunteer work, Victoria noticed that her mother was quieter than usual and seemed to avoid activities that required greater physical effort. When she questioned Sarah about this, she received the typical response of a mother worried about not worrying. "It's nothing, my daughter, just a bit of tiredness from work. At my age, it's normal to feel the weight of years." Victoria wasn't completely convinced. "Mom, you always taught us to tell the truth and not hide important problems, so please tell me if you're feeling something different." Sarah hugged her daughter, trying to disguise her own concern. "Victoria, dear, if it was something serious, I would tell you all. Trust me just as I've always trusted God to take care of our family." The discovery happened unexpectedly during a routine examination that Sarah had annually at the medical center itself as part of the employee benefits, when Samantha decided to personally follow up on the results by a coincidence of fate. The tests revealed a heart condition that had developed silently, possibly aggravated by the years of stress and intensive work that Sarah had faced to rebuild her life and help other families. Samantha felt the world crumble when she saw the results, indicating a cardiomyopathy that required immediate treatment and possibly surgery, a cruel irony of fate that placed the woman who had saved so many children with heart disease in the position of needing the same type of care she had provided for others. Sarah tried to minimize the seriousness of the situation when Samantha confronted her with the results. "Daughter, it's nothing that can't be controlled with medication. I don't want you and Victoria to worry unnecessarily about this." Samantha held her mother's hands with the same determination that Sarah had shown years before. "Mom, now it's my turn to take care of you, and we'll do everything necessary to ensure you have the best possible treatment. You taught us that we should never give up when it comes to family." The news of Sarah's condition spread quickly through the community she had tirelessly served for a decade, creating a spontaneous mobilization of support that surprised even Edward, who had witnessed firsthand the transformative impact of Sarah's social work. Families who had been helped by Sarah's programs began to show up at the medical center, offering any kind of help they could provide, from financial donations to offers to take care of the house and prepare meals during treatment. Victoria organized this community mobilization with impressive efficiency, creating a system to coordinate the offers of help and ensure that Sarah received all the emotional and practical support necessary during her treatment. Edward insisted on covering all medical costs and bringing in the best available specialists, but Sarah initially resisted, arguing that she didn't want to be a financial burden on anyone, even after all she had done for the company and the community. Sarah expressed her concerns to Edward. "I've always taken care of myself and my daughters. I don't want everyone to have to worry about me now, when there are so many other people in need." Edward responded with emotion. "Sarah, you've dedicated 10 years of your life caring for others. Now it's time to let others care for you. And this isn't charity, it's justice and gratitude." The treatment process proved more complex than initially expected, requiring a combination of specialized medications, significant lifestyle changes, and eventually a surgical procedure to correct the compromised heart function. Samantha personally assumed the medical coordination of her mother's case, working together with cardiologists specialized in adult cases and ensuring that Sarah received exactly the same level of exceptional care that she had provided for Victoria years before. During medical consultations, Sarah frequently commented on the irony of the situation. I never imagined that one day I would be a patient in the hospital I helped create, and that my own daughter would be one of the doctors caring for me. Victoria remained constantly by her mother's side, offering the same type of unconditional emotional support that she had received as a child, and frequently reminded Sarah of her own words about trusting God and medicine when everything seemed uncertain. The experience of seeing her mother vulnerable and in need of care brought Victoria an even deeper understanding of the sacrifice Sarah had made for her years before. "Mum, now I completely understand what you felt when I was sick, and I want you to know that I will fight for you exactly as you fought for me." Sarah smiled through tears. "My daughter, you and Samantha have already given me the greatest gift a mother can receive, which is to see her daughters become women of integrity and compassion." During the preparation period for the heart surgery, the community organized a series of events to show support for Sarah, including a special ceremony where dozens of families who had benefited from the social programs gave public testimonies about the transformative impact Sarah had made in their lives. Mothers who had received medical assistance for their children, young people who had secured scholarships, families who had participated in income generation programs, all organized themselves to express their gratitude and demonstrate that Sarah would never be alone in her fight against the disease. Edward took the opportunity to announce the creation of a permanent medical assistance fund in Sarah's name, ensuring that the legacy of her work would continue to benefit families in need regardless of her health condition. Dr. Williams, now medical director of the center, and with completely white hair, made a point of personally overseeing Sarah's case. This extraordinary woman has saved hundreds of children through the center she helped create, and now it is our collective responsibility to save her. Sarah was deeply moved by the demonstration of affection. "I never imagined that my simple decision to return a coffin found in the trash could result in so much love and support when I needed it most. God truly works in mysterious ways." Sarah's surgery was performed by the same medical team that had saved Victoria years before, creating a poetic symmetry that was not lost on anyone involved in the procedure. Samantha could not directly participate in the surgery due to emotional involvement, but remained at the hospital throughout the entire procedure, experiencing for the first time the anguish of waiting for news about a loved one in an operating room. Victoria organized a vigil at the hospital where community members took turns praying and showing support, creating an atmosphere of collective hope that reminded everyone present of the power of human solidarity. Edward cancelled all his business commitments to stay with Sarah's daughters during the wait, demonstrating the same type of loyalty and dedication that Sarah had shown to his company over the years. Dr. Williams periodically came out of the operating room to update the family on the progress of the procedure. "The surgery is proceeding as planned, and Sarah is responding very well to the treatment, exactly as we expected from a woman with her strength of spirit." Samantha held Victoria's hands. "Our mother is the strongest person we know, and if anyone can overcome this, it's her." After 6 hours of successful surgery, Sarah woke up surrounded by the love of her daughters and the gratitude of an entire community that had mobilized to repay years of dedication and selfless service. The first days of recovery were marked by a constant parade of visitors, bringing flowers, cards, homemade food, and most importantly, stories about how Sarah had positively impacted their lives through her tireless work in the social area. Victoria documented each visit and each testimony, creating a permanent record of the legacy her mother had built through years of honesty, dedication, and unwavering faith. Sarah was often moved to tears hearing the stories. "I never realized I was doing something so special. I was just trying to help people in the best way I knew how." Edward visited daily and used their conversations to recall how their first meeting had not only changed Sarah's life, but had transformed his own perspective on social responsibility and the ethical use of wealth. "Sarah, you taught me that true success is not measured by what we accumulate, but by what we share with others. Your recovery is not just a personal victory. It's a victory for all of us who have learned from your example." 3 months after the surgery, Sarah was completely recovered and more determined than ever to continue her social work, but now with an even deeper understanding of the importance of taking care of her own health in order to continue caring for others. The experience of being a patient at the medical center she had helped create gave her a unique perspective on the needs of the families served and inspired several improvements in the services offered. Samantha and Victoria had grown even more during the experience, taking on greater responsibilities in social programs and demonstrating that the values of honesty, compassion, and dedication that Sarah had taught them were being passed on to a new generation. Sarah's recovery was celebrated with a community party at the medical center, where she was officially honored as Mother of the Community for her transformative impact in the region. During her acceptance speech, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple decision to return something that did not belong to her. 18 years ago, I found a coffin in the dump and decided to do what I considered right, even when it meant risking my daughter's life. Today I see that this decision not only saved my family, but created a network of love and support that sustained me when I needed it most. She looked at Samantha and Victoria with maternal pride. The greatest treasure I can leave for my daughters is not money or property, but the knowledge that honesty, faith, and compassion always create circles of kindness that return to protect us when we need them most. Victoria approached the microphone with firm steps and spoke with the profound maturity of someone who had learned valuable lessons about life, death, and rebirth through experiences that had marked her soul forever. When I was a fragile 9-year-old child, my brave mother chose to return a fortune that could have solved all our problems immediately, preferring to save my life through pure honesty instead of accepting the easy money that was literally in her hands. She risked everything, including my own life, because she believed that doing the right thing is always worth it, even when it seems impossible and dangerous. Today, 18 years later, that same unwavering honesty created an entire community that spontaneously mobilized to save her life when she needed it most. Hundreds of families who were touched by her kindness united as a giant family to return the love they received. This is not a simple coincidence or luck of destiny. It is the transformative power of integrity, creating sacred circles of protection that last generations and strengthen with time. Victoria paused, looking directly at Sarah with tears of gratitude in her eyes. My mother taught me that when we plant honesty, we reap multiplied love, and today we are seeing living proof that God never abandons those who do good without looking at who. Sarah hugged her daughters with maternal strength, while the emotional crowd stood applauding, finally understanding with absolute clarity that her extraordinary journey had been completed in a perfect and divine way. She had planted small seeds of honesty over the years that grew into a lush forest of love and support that now completely protected her. Edward approached the microphone and concluded the ceremony with emotion-laden words that perfectly summarized the profound meaning of that historic moment. Sarah has taught us through her living example that doing the right thing is not just an individual moral choice, it is a sacred investment in the collective future, because the kindness we plant today with sacrifice will be the love that sustains us tomorrow when we need it most. She proved that honesty is the only true wealth that multiplies when shared. As the sun majestically set once again over the medical center that proudly bore her name, Sarah looked at the golden sky and whispered a final prayer of deep gratitude. Thank you, Almighty Lord, for showing me that the sacred circle of life truly completes itself when we live with absolute honesty and unwavering faith, and for allowing me to see with my own eyes my own kindness returning multiplied to protect me through the love of the people I had the privilege to serve. Now tell me in the comments where you're from and tell me, did you like this story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and check out the next one that is waiting for you here on the screen. I'll wait for you there.